She's lying, Scott. Dr. Howard pointed at the glowing X-ray. These are old fractures, multiple deliberate breaks. Claire didn't flinch. She just smiled at him, then texted my boss mid-exam. 10 minutes later, I was suspended for abuse. No hearing, no chance to explain, just erased. She'd planned this with her brother for months, staging bruises, stockpiling lies, even fake photos. Every bruise I didn't cause, she logged it as evidence. And the worst part? My own parents asked, "Son, is it true?" But I had something they didn't expect. That same X-ray the doctor saw? It's about to bury them both, financially, legally, and publicly. And trust me, she has no idea what I saw on her phone, what I do next. They'll never recover from. My name is Scott Mercer, and I'm 45 years old. After 20 years of overtime shifts at the factory, I come home each night to the modest house I share with my wife Claire, where motor oil and fresh coffee scents mingle in familiar comfort. The porch boards creak their usual welcome, and the kitchen's warm light spills across our clean table, a routine as steady as my paycheck. Lately, though, Claire's been different. Late nights without explanation, phone calls that stop when I enter the room. Her brother Warren watches me with barely hidden disdain, his concerned comments about my long hours feeling more like accusations. My fingers trace the half-loose door hinge as it ticks against the evening draft, cataloging each detail like I catalog parts at work. But let me start from the beginning. I hadn't planned on spending that Tuesday night in County General's emergency room, but when Claire doubled over during dinner, clutching her ribs and barely able to breathe, I didn't hesitate. You know that feeling when someone you love is hurting? Nothing else matters. 20 years of marriage kicks in like muscle memory. The drive there was torture. Every pothole making her wince. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other reaching across to steady her when the road got rough. "Almost there, honey," I said. Probably more times than necessary. The streets were quiet, thankfully. Most folks already home for the night. The emergency room hadn't changed since my last tetanus shot. Same buzzing fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. Same antiseptic smell that burned your nose hairs. I filled out the forms while Claire sat hunched in one of those hard plastic chairs, each breath shallow and careful. The pen felt clumsy in my work-calloused hands as I checked boxes and scrawled signatures. Remember those old waiting rooms before they got all modern? The kind with coffee-stained magazines from 3 years ago, and a TV bolted high in the corner, always showing some game show nobody's watching? That's where we sat for what felt like hours, but was probably just 40 minutes. When they finally called her name, I followed the tech and Claire down a maze of corridors. The X-ray room was colder than the rest of the hospital. You could feel it right through your clothes. I watched them position Claire under that big panel hanging from the ceiling. The tech, gentle but efficient. They gave me her coat to hold, and I stood there gripping it like some kind of shield. Funny how the mind works in moments like that. I remember noticing a loose thread on the collar, making a mental note to fix it later. "Wait here, Mr. Mercer," the tech said, ushering me to a chair in the hallway. The vinyl squeaked under my weight, and I sat there counting the floor tiles, trying not to worry. Through the wall, I could hear the muffled hum of the machine doing its work. Dr. Howard came back with the results faster than I expected. He was one of those older docs, probably in his 60s, with steady hands and eyes that had seen it all. But something was off about his expression when he held that film up to the light. The image glowed like a photographic negative of sunrise. All blacks and whites and grays. You ever watch someone's face change when they're reading something troubling? It's subtle. A tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of the jaw. That's what I saw as Dr. Howard studied those X-rays. His hand trembled just slightly as he gripped the folder, and his knuckles went white against the manila paper. "Doc," I said, keeping my voice level, "give it to me straight. 20 years working with machines teaches you to appreciate plain talk." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took this measured breath, the kind that usually comes before bad news, got up, closed the door with a soft click. When he came back, he lowered his voice and pointed to these clustered white lines on the film. "I've seen plenty of X-rays before. Broke my arm in '92, cracked 3 ribs in a motorcycle accident back in '88. But these looked different. Old breaks, healed over. Multiple ones." Finally, Dr. Howard looked up and met my eyes. Something in his expression made my stomach drop before he even opened his mouth. "Who did this to you?" he asked Claire, his voice barely above a whisper. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that linoleum floor. Claire's face went blank, like a computer screen switching off, and my world tilted sideways. The silence stretched like taffy until Dr. Howard cleared his throat. "These fracture patterns," he said, tapping the film with his pen. "They're consistent with repeated trauma. See these calcified areas? Multiple impacts, different healing stages. Not what we typically see from a single accident." My mouth went dry. 20 years of marriage, and I'd never known about old broken ribs. Claire shifted in her chair, that plastic squeak cutting through the quiet. "Oh, that must be from years ago," she said, voice higher than usual. "Remember when I told you about tripping over the garden tools? Caught myself right on that old rake handle." She gave a little laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Clumsy me, right? You know that feeling when something's off but you can't put your finger on it? Like when a machine's running just a hair wrong. Not enough to shut down, but enough to make your ears perk up? That's what hit me then." Claire's eyes were too still, fixed on some point past Dr. Howard's shoulder. "When exactly was this garden accident?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "The way you talk to a skittish bearing that might seize up if you push too hard." Claire's shoulder lifted in a half shrug. "Oh, must have been, 3, 4 years back? During that dry spell when the ground was all hard?" She waved her hand like she was brushing away cobwebs. "It's ancient history now." Dr. Howard's pen scratched against his clipboard, but slower now, deliberate. His whole demeanor had shifted into something more careful, more clinical. I'd seen that look before, when lawyers got involved after workplace accidents. The doctor was choosing his words like he was picking his way through a minefield. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I'd like to schedule a follow-up next week, just to be thorough." He glanced at me, then back to his notes. "And perhaps we should discuss some additional screenings." Claire cut him off, with a bright smile that didn't match the tension in her shoulders. "That won't be necessary, doctor. I'm feeling much better already." She stood up, gathering her purse. "Just needed to make sure nothing was seriously wrong, right?" I helped her with her coat, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind churned like bad coffee on a Monday morning. The discharge process was a blur of papers and signatures. Through it all, I kept my face neutral, the same expression I use when checking gauge readings at work. Calm. Professional. Recording every detail. The rain had picked up by the time we made it to the parking lot, needling against the windshield in sheets. I held my jacket over Claire's head as we hurried to the car, got her settled in the passenger seat. The dome light cast harsh shadows across her face as she pulled out her phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen, and I caught Warren's name flashing before she tilted the phone away. Warren. Her brother. The same Warren who'd been making those concerned comments about our marriage at family dinners. The same Warren who always seemed to know things about our finances that I never mentioned. I focused on backing out of the parking space, mentally logging everything. The time, 9:47 p.m. The way Claire's hand trembled slightly as she typed. How she angled herself away from me toward the door. 20 years of working with precision machinery teaches you to notice details, to catalog them, to wait for patterns to emerge. The wipers clicked back and forth, marking time as I drove. Claire's phone kept lighting up the car's interior in brief blue flashes. Each time she'd respond immediately, like whatever Warren was saying couldn't wait until morning. I decided right then to stay up after we got home. Wait until Claire took her pain meds and dozed off. Then I'd find out what Big Brother Warren wanted so badly tonight. I waited until midnight. That's when our old house usually settles in for the night, pipes cooling down with little pings, that one floorboard by the bathroom finally shutting up. Claire's breathing had gone soft and steady, the way it always did when her prescription kicked in. Funny how you learn these rhythms after 20 years, isn't it? Like knowing exactly when a machine's about to need maintenance just by the sound it makes. Her phone sat on the nightstand, screen down, blue notification light blinking like a patient's pulse. I'd watched her set it there after taking her meds, noticed how she'd hesitated before letting it go. 20 years of marriage, and I'd never once thought about checking her messages. Trust was like that. You either had it or you didn't. But trust, like steel, can crack when enough pressure hits the right spot. My fingers felt thick, clumsy as I reached for the phone. Sweat made my palms slick. You ever try to lift something delicate while your heart's hammering so hard you can feel it in your fingertips? That's what it was like. Easing that phone off the nightstand, I held my breath, like I used to do when adjusting calibration screws on the factory's finest gauges. Claire had always used simple passwords, our anniversary date usually. First try, and I was in. The message thread with Warren sat right at the top, timestamp showing 11:42 p.m. Recent. Urgent. My thumb hovered over it for a second before I tapped. The texts loaded like a punch to the gut. Warren's messages scrolled up the screen, each one worse than the last. Remember, document everything. Every time he raises his voice, every time he comes home late, we need a pattern. Claire, the doctor saw the old breaks today. He asked questions. Warren, perfect. That's exactly what we needed. Did you mention the accidents? Claire, told him about falling on the rake. He didn't buy it. Warren, doesn't matter. Medical record shows trauma now. Get photos of any bruise, any mark. Even if you bump the counter, document it. Date it. We need leverage before month end when the fiscal year closes. My hands started shaking. You know that feeling when you realize you've been working with a faulty blueprint? When everything you thought was solid turns out to be drawn in invisible ink? Each message was another blow to the foundation I'd built my life on. There were photos too. Normal bruises anyone gets from bumping into things, but with dates and notes attached. Times I'd worked late labeled as unexplained absences. A small cut from garden work, marked as evidence of escalation. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years, building a case against me, piece by piece, while I kept showing up every day, punching that clock, thinking I was securing our future. I couldn't risk losing this proof. My fingers moved fast but careful, taking screenshots, sending them to my phone. Each one backed up to an email account Claire didn't know about. 20 years in manufacturing teaches you to always have redundancy, always have backup. Warren, once we file, his overtime pay is yours, house too. They always side with the victim. Claire, what if he fights it? Warren, that's what the medical records are for. No judge will believe him over x-rays and doctor's notes. Trust me, I've seen it work before. Before I could scroll further, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. That distinctive flex of wood under weight. My hand froze. Phone, half tilted, screen glowing like a beacon in the dark. The bedroom door handle started to turn with a soft metallic click. Claire stood in the doorway, a shadow cut from darker shadows, but I could feel her eyes lock onto the phone in my hand. For a split second, neither of us moved. You know that moment right before a machine fails? When everything goes dead quiet? That's what it felt like. Then she lunged. Her fingers caught the edge of the phone and ripped it away. The force of it nearly took me off balance. My palms went damp as her breath came in sharp little hisses between her teeth, like air escaping a punctured line. You really shouldn't have done that, Scott. Her voice had gone low, dangerous. Not the voice I'd woken up next to for 20 years. One word from me. Just one. And everything you've built crashes down. You know how fast accusations stick? A lot faster than truth can wash them off. I'd seen metal shear under pressure enough times to recognize the same principle at work here. But I'd also learned that staying steady was the only way through any crisis. Warren's been coaching you. I kept my voice flat, factual, just stating what the evidence showed. Her jaw set like poured concrete. The same look she'd get when I'd suggest maybe her brother should pay back some of the money he'd borrowed over the years. But this time there was something harder behind it. Something final. I made screenshots, I said, watching her face. Every message. Every plan you two cooked up. A smile spread across her face then. But there wasn't any warmth in it, like looking at a blueprint and seeing all the measurements were wrong, but being told to build it anyway. You really think anyone's going to care where your evidence came from? She almost laughed. By the time I'm done, those screenshots will look like desperate fabrications from an abusive husband trying to cover his tracks. The rage pushed against my ribs like a hydraulic press, steady and brutal. But I'd spent 20 years calibrating machines that could crush a man without blinking. I knew all about controlling pressure. October 12th, I said, keeping my voice level. That's when Warren first messaged you about staging accidents. November 3rd, when you started documenting normal bruises as evidence. Today at the hospital, those x-rays showing old breaks that Dr. Howard couldn't explain. I've got it all, Claire. She took a step back, thumbs already flying across her phone's screen. The blue light painted her face in harsh shadows, making her look like a stranger. Maybe she always had been. Want to see how fast a story can spread? Her thumbs kept tapping. Each soft click, like a nail being driven into my reputation. By morning, everyone at your precious factory will know exactly what kind of man you really are. Or at least, what kind of man I say you are. Remember how I mentioned that smell of motor oil and coffee that used to fill our kitchen? Right then, all I could smell was something burning. Maybe it was the last 20 years of my life going up in smoke. Let's see how work reacts, she whispered, thumb hovering over the send button. How many of your buddies will stand by you once they hear my version? Then she killed the light, leaving me in darkness with nothing but the ghost of her phone screen burned into my vision and the sound of her footsteps moving away down the hall. Years ago, I'd watched a pressure gauge fail during a test. The needle had swung wild for just a second before everything went critical. Standing there in the dark, I felt like that gauge, watching my life's pressure swing into the red zone, knowing the worst was still coming. I woke up to gray light seeping through the blinds, and my phone buzzing across the nightstand. Claire's side of the bed was empty, sheets cold. 20 years of mornings, and this was the first time that emptiness felt right. You ever notice how bad news always comes with that particular kind of buzz? Not the friendly little chirp of a text, but that insistent drone that says someone's world is about to shift. It was Janet from HR. "Scott, we need you to come in immediately regarding some serious allegations that have been brought to our attention." My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. I'd known this was coming, but knowing doesn't make the hit any softer, does it? The drive to the factory was muscle memory. Same route I'd taken for 2 decades. But this morning, everything looked different. The security guard who usually waved me through with a smile checked my ID twice. Made me think of all those times I'd watched other guys get walked out, never thinking it could be me. The factory floor hit me like a physical thing. You spend enough time in a place, you learn its rhythms, the whine of belt drives, the hiss of pneumatics, the steady thrum of the stamping press. It's like music once you know the tune. But that morning, every sound felt too sharp, too hostile. I walked past stations where conversations died mid-sentence. Guys I'd worked beside for years suddenly found their boots real interesting. Tommy Chen, who just had me over for his kid's graduation party last month, turned his whole body away when I passed. That hurt worse than Claire's threats, somehow. Have you ever watched dominoes fall? How one tips into another, then another, until everything you've lined up comes crashing down? That's what it felt like walking into HR. Janet sat behind her desk, all professional sympathy and careful distance. A thin manila folder lay between us like a bomb waiting to go off. Beside her, Bill from legal kept his face neutral, but his pen tapped an anxious rhythm against his notepad. "Scott," Janet started, then paused to choose her words. "We've received some concerning reports about domestic incidents." I watched them stack phrases like they were laying cinder blocks. Interim leave, duty of care, investigatory process. Each one another brick in the wall being built between me and 20 years of honest work. "I can provide hospital records," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Timeline of events. Dr. Howard's observations about..." Bill's pen stopped tapping. "We'll need to follow formal channels, Scott. You understand. Distance is necessary while we investigate." My temporary badge, that piece of plastic that had opened doors for 2 decades, made a sad little click when I set it on Janet's desk. Funny how something so small can sound so final. The parking lot air hit like a slap when I stepped out. Early March in the Midwest doesn't mess around. The kind of cold that burns your lungs and makes your eyes water. At least, that's what I told myself, was making my eyes water. I unlocked my car, the same car I'd driven to work thousands of times, and saw 2 unread messages from my mother. The first was just my name with a question mark. The second one gutted me. "Son, is it true?" My phone started buzzing again. Mom's picture lighting up the screen. I stared at the steering wheel. Its worn leather suddenly fascinating. 20 years of gripping that wheel. Driving to an honest job. Building a life I thought couldn't be shaken. The phone kept buzzing. Mom's face smiled up at me from a photo taken at last Christmas, when everything still made sense. When I was still her boy who could do no wrong. I sat in my parents' driveway for a good 5 minutes before I could make myself get out. The house looked exactly like it had since '82. Same cream siding, same red shutters Dad touched up every spring. But something felt different now, like walking into a familiar room where all the furniture's been shifted an inch to the left. You know that feeling when you're about to disappoint people who've never doubted you? It sits in your chest, like a stone. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She'd been watching for me, probably since that text. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she had that thin smile she used when trying to hold something together. "Come in, honey," she said, voice careful as glass. "Your father's in the kitchen." Dad sat at the table, hands folded like he was waiting for Grace before supper. He didn't look up when I walked in. 20 years of proud backslaps and "that's my boy" reduced to studied silence. Mom put coffee in front of us. The good cups, the ones with gold rims that only came out for company. Her hands shook a little as she poured. Nobody touched their cup. "Warren called," she finally said. "He told us things." "Warren's lying," I said, but the words felt hollow, like shouting into a cave. Claire went to the hospital yesterday. X-rays showed old injuries she tried to blame on me. I found messages on her phone. Her and Warren plotting the whole thing. Dad's hands tightened, knuckles going white. Still wouldn't look at me. But why would Claire? Mom trailed off, twisting her wedding ring. You've been together so long. You seemed happy. I pulled out my phone, tried to show them the screenshots I'd managed to save. But explaining conspiracy makes you sound crazy, doesn't it? Every word just dug the hole deeper. Son, Dad finally spoke, voice rough. If you need help with anger management, John, Mom whispered, but he kept going. The factory has programs, counseling. Better to get ahead of this before, Dad. My voice cracked. Just that one word. He finally looked at me, and I saw doubt warring with love in his eyes. That old kitchen suddenly felt too small. The walls had heard my first words, seen my first steps. Now they watched my parents wonder if they'd raised a monster. I stood up. Mom reached for my arm but let her hand fall. We love you, she said. We just want to understand. I know. The coffee sat untouched, cooling in those fancy cups. I'll figure this out. I promise. The drive home stretched like taffy. Every streetlight, every stop sign seemed to ask, how do you prove a negative? How do you fight a shadow? Claire's car wasn't in the driveway. The house stood dark except for the porch light we always left on. Habit from happier days. Inside, the kitchen counter held a neat stack of mail, topped by a thick envelope labeled Dissolution of Marriage. I dropped into a chair, legs suddenly hollow. The packet was all official letterhead and legal language, with a pen clipped to the top page. Property division, reputation clauses, non-disparagement agreements. Each line read like a trap door, ready to drop me into a hole I'd never climb out of. 20 years of marriage reduced to paragraph numbers and signature lines. The exhaustion hit me like a physical thing, heavy as my work coat after a double shift. Maybe signing was the answer. Just end it clean. Walk away with whatever scraps of dignity I could salvage. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I uncapped it. A gust of wind rattled the front door, the same door I'd hung myself 10 years back, Claire holding the level while I drove the screws. The pen point hovered over the signature line. My phone buzzed, screen lighting up with an unknown number. The phone's glow felt like a lifeline in that dark kitchen. I almost missed the call, fumbling to answer it. Scott Mercer? A gravelly voice, worn as old leather. This is Dr. Howard from County General. We need to talk. Not here? Not now. Can you meet me at the clinic after hours? I glanced at the divorce papers, then at the empty driveway where Claire's car should have been. What time? 9. Use the staff entrance off Marion Street. Come alone. The line went dead. You ever notice how time crawls when you're waiting? I spent 3 hours pacing the house, checking my watch, and fighting the urge to sign those papers just to make the pressure stop. The sun set like it was tired, dragging shadows across our family photos. Claire and me at the lake house, at her cousin's wedding, building the deck. 20 years of memories, and I couldn't tell which ones were real anymore. At 8:45, I pulled into the clinic's back lot. A single window glowed 3 floors up, like a lighthouse in fog. The staff door buzzed when I touched it. Dr. Howard stood in the hallway, coat off, sleeves rolled up. He looked older in the fluorescent light, lines deeper around his eyes. This way, he said, leading me to his office. The whole floor was dark except for his desk lamp. A vending machine hummed in the corner, casting a blue glow that made everything feel underwater. Coffee maker burbled on a side table. The good stuff. Not hospital sludge. He poured 2 cups, handed me one. Cream's in the mini fridge if you want it. I took mine black. Always have. 23 years in emergency medicine, he said, settling behind his desk. Before that, Army medic, Vietnam. You see patterns, in wounds, in people. He sipped his coffee. In lies. My cup stopped halfway to my mouth. You've seen this before. Staged injuries? Oh yes. Usually it's insurance fraud. Sometimes custody battles. He set his cup down carefully. Sometimes it's worse. Had a case in '82. Wife and brother-in-law ran the same play on 3 different men. By the time anyone connected the dots, they'd cleaned out bank accounts, ruined reputations. The coffee turned bitter on my tongue. Why are you telling me this? Because truth needs backbone, Mr. Mercer. Not volume, not violence. Spine. He opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed manila folder. What I'm about to do could cost me my license. But there are times when rules strangle justice. I studied his face in the lamplight. The set of his jaw reminded me of my old foreman, Tom, who'd break protocol to get a job done right. Why risk it? Because I've watched good men get steamrolled by lies. He tapped the folder. Sometimes the only way through a locked door is to lean on it. The wall clock ticked, each sound like a hammer strike. Dr. Howard slid the folder across his desk, wood gleaming under the lamp. You know that moment before a big lift at work, when you plant your feet and set your grip? That's how I felt, placing my hands on that folder. I rolled my sleeves up. Clock-in ritual, pure habit, and drew a careful breath. Whatever's in here, I said. I'll use it clean. He nodded once. That's why I called you, son. The folder's seal crackled as I broke it. Inside, medical records fanned out like playing cards. All with Claire's name, but from years I'd never known about. My hands went cold as I read the first entry. St. Mary's Hospital, 2001, I muttered. That's 2 years before I met her. Keep reading, Dr. Howard said, leaning forward in his chair. Same complaint pattern. Ribs, carefully documented bruising, detailed patient statements. But the names were different. 3 men I'd never heard of, spread across 5 years before me. You know that feeling when you realize you've been working with a faulty blueprint all along? When every measurement you trusted suddenly shifts? The injuries show specific clustering, Dr. Howard explained, pointing to X-ray dates. See how they escalate just before legal filings? Classic staging. Actual domestic violence has scattered patterns, random timing. This is, he tapped the papers, choreographed. I found Warren's name in the margins. Patient's brother present during intake. Always there, always with the same documented concerns. My coffee sat forgotten, growing cold. Look at the statement language, Dr. Howard continued. He pulled out highlighted phrases. I was afraid to come forward. He seemed so normal to everyone else. I kept hoping he'd change. He shook his head. Word for word matches across years. That's coaching, not confession. The room felt like it was tilting. 20 years of memories reframed themselves. Claire's careful photos of household accidents, Warren's constant presence during doctor visits, the way they document every minor disagreement in writing. I'd thought it was her being thorough. Now I saw the foundation they'd been laying, brick by calculated brick. Mr. Mercer. Dr. Howard's voice cut through my spiral. He pointed to his wall calendar. You've got a deadline. These accusations she's filed, they lock into official record at month's end unless you counterfile with evidence. I counted days. 11 left. The month looked like a closing fist. Mind if I photograph these? I pulled out my phone, already thinking about timestamps and message threads. That's why I brought them. He stood, stretching his back. Take your time. Be thorough. I worked, methodically, the way I document machine maintenance. Each page got 3 clear shots. I noted dates, cross-referenced them with Warren's texts, built a timeline in my head. The pieces weren't just falling into place, they were building a weapon. You'll testify? I asked, looking up from the last page. Could get messy. Son, I've been shot at in rice paddies and sued by millionaires. He smiled grimly. I can handle some heat from the medical board. Why risk it? The question had been nagging at me. He was quiet for a moment, staring at his degrees on the wall. My father lost everything to a similar scam in '69. By the time he proved his innocence, the damage was done. Sometimes you have to stand up, even if it costs you. I slid the copies into my jacket pocket, each one like a round of ammunition. I won't waste this. Don't. He held out his hand. And Scott, make it count. We shook, his grip firm as steel. The exit door groaned as I pushed through it, night air hitting my face like a wake-up slap. In my truck, I spread the photos across the passenger seat, moonlight catching the edges. Names, dates, patterns, all the pieces Claire and Warren thought were buried. Tomorrow would start with my lawyer, then HR. I felt my mind shifting gears, the way it does when a broken machine finally shows its weakness. No more defense, no more reacting. Their game had rules. Their script had beats. And now I had the whole playbook in my pocket. The next morning, I spread everything across my kitchen table like I was prepping for a major equipment overhaul. You know how it goes. First you lay out all your tools, then you break down the job into steps that make sense. My coffee went cold while I sorted through the evidence, creating neat piles that told our story in reverse. 20 years of marriage stripped down to exhibits and timestamps. It felt strange, like dismantling a machine I'd helped build. Finding all the worn parts and stress points I'd missed during maintenance. Exhibit A, I muttered, labeling the first folder. Inside went the hospital x-rays from last week, with Dr. Howard's clinical notes highlighting those suspicious fracture patterns. The image seemed to glow accusingly under my kitchen lights. Each healed break a question I should have asked years ago. Remember those old metal filing cabinets in school? How satisfying that click was when everything lined up right? That's how it felt, organizing each piece of evidence. Warren's text messages went into Exhibit B. Time-stamped screenshots showing their whole playbook. I could trace their plan like a wiring diagram. Claire's accidents, Warren's coaching, the careful documentation they thought would trap me. Exhibit C through F, I said to myself. Filing Dr. Howard's sealed records. 5 different hospitals, 3 different men before me. Same story every time. I labeled each instance chronologically, noting how Warren's involvement grew more sophisticated with each iteration. The pattern was clearer than a maintenance log. They'd been refining their technique for years. You ever notice how truth has its own weight? Those folders felt heavy in my hands, dense with facts that couldn't be twisted away. I drove to the courthouse during lunch, brown accordion file riding shotgun like a partner. The clerk's office smelled like old paper and printer toner. Behind the counter, a woman with reading glasses hanging from a chain studied my counterfiling documents. Final hearing date needs to be before month end, I explained. It's time sensitive. She nodded, flipping through pages. Judge Harrison has an opening next Thursday, 9 a.m. sharp. Perfect timing. I'd already confirmed Dr. Howard could testify that morning. I'd drafted his witness outline over breakfast, kept it clean and focused on the medical facts. No emotions, no speculation, just clinical evidence that would stand up to cross-examination. While she processed the paperwork, I double-checked my backup plans. 2 thumb drives held, scanned copies of everything, one in my truck's lockbox, one headed for my parents' safe. Claire might have learned some tricks over the years, but I'd learned a few things about redundancy from 2 decades in manufacturing. The clerk's stamp came down with a solid thunk. Official, filed. No turning back now. I ate a sandwich in the parking lot, rehearsing answers to possible questions. Stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak. Don't get baited into arguments or accusations. The same discipline that kept machines running smooth would keep me steady on the stand. The late afternoon sun painted the sky red as I drove home. Traffic was light, giving me time to think through next steps. I'd set my alarm early for court day. Wear my blue suit, the one that still fit right from all those overtime shifts. The evidence case sat in my passenger seat, latched tight, everything in its place. 20 years of marriage, and it all came down to labeled exhibits and timestamps. But sometimes that's what truth needs. Not dramatic speeches or loud denials, just careful documentation and patience. The kind of patience you learn watching gauge needles, listening for bearing sounds, waiting for the right moment to make your move. I pulled into my driveway as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house looked different somehow, like a familiar machine with its panels pulled back, showing all its hidden gears. I checked my phone's alarm settings one more time before heading inside. Everything was ready. Court buildings always smell like furniture polish and worry. I'd been in this one before, testifying about workplace accidents, but never for anything this personal. The marble floors echoed every footstep like a metronome counting down to something final. You know that feeling, when you're about to start a critical repair and you've triple-checked every tool and part? That's how I felt, watching Claire and Warren through the crowd near the courtroom doors. They stood like they were at a country club dinner, not a hearing that could reshape 3 lives. Claire wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car, while Warren kept straightening his gold cufflinks, scanning the gathering crowd like he was counting ticket sales. Their laughter carried across the hallway, that easy, practiced kind that says, "We've already won." I'd heard that same hollow confidence from guys right before a machine they'd neglected finally gave out on them. "Morning, Scott." Dr. Howard's voice was steady behind me. He looked different in his court suit, but his hands were the same. Strong and certain, the kind that had probably saved more lives than I'd had. Overtime shifts. "Ready?" I nodded, watching him adjust his tie. Those fingers had sewn up war wounds in Vietnam before most of these lawyers had learned to walk. Something about that thought steadied me. We filed into courtroom B when they called our case. The room felt older than its walls, like it had absorbed decades of arguments and verdicts into its dark wood panels. Claire and Warren took their seats up front. Her attorney, Thompson, or Thompson, some name that probably cost 3 figures an hour, arranging papers like he was dealing cards. "All rise." Judge Harrison entered, robes settling like black wings as she took her seat. I'd done my homework. 20 years on the bench, reputation for seeing through theatrics. The kind of judge who'd appreciate facts over drama. "Your Honor," Thompson stood before she'd finished settling. Before we proceed, I must object to any introduction of sealed medical records. They're privileged information, obtained through questionable means, and their admission would prejudice my client's right to privacy. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. I'd expected this. It's like when someone tries to block access to a machine's maintenance history right before an inspection. The judge's glasses caught the fluorescent light as she turned to our table. Counsel, your response? Our attorney, Dave Miller, who'd worked his way through law school fixing cars, stood slowly. Your Honor, these records establish a pattern of similar claims against multiple parties. Their probative value substantially outweighs any privacy concerns, particularly given Dr. Howard's direct knowledge of the matters in question. The wall clock ticked 7 times before Judge Harrison spoke again. Each click felt like a gear tooth, catching, waiting for the mechanism to engage or fail. I'll need an offer of proof, she said finally, looking at Dr. Howard. Doctor, approach the bench. Dr. Howard stood, his movements precise as a surgical incision. He'd warned me this might happen. Judges being careful with sealed records. But he'd also said truth had its own momentum once you got it rolling. I watched him lean close to the bench, speaking too low for the gallery to hear. The judge's expression didn't change, but her pen stopped moving halfway through his explanation. When he finished, she studied her notes for 3 more clock ticks. Objection overruled. The words fell like hammer strikes in the quiet room. Dr. Howard, please take the stand. Claire's face tightened for the first time that morning. Warren's hand froze mid-cufflink adjust. Their attorney started writing furiously, probably rebuilding whatever strategy he'd planned around keeping those records buried. Dr. Howard walked to the witness box, each step measured and sure. The clerk held out a Bible, and those steady hands, the ones that had stitched soldiers and saved lives and finally pulled truth into the light, rose to take the oath. I'd seen that same steady focus in Dr. Howard's eyes during Claire's X-ray exam. The look of someone who measures twice before making a single cut. He settled into the witness chair like he was pulling up to an operating table, hands folded precisely on the wooden rail. Dr. Howard, our attorney began, could you walk us through your findings regarding Mrs. Mercer's injuries? Of course. He gestured toward the X-ray mounted on the lightboard. What we're looking at here are multiple rib fractures at different stages of healing. The oldest shows complete calcification. That's at least 18 months old. The next set demonstrates partial healing, roughly 8 to 10 months. The most recent injury occurred within the past 60 days. The medical terminology reminded me of maintenance logs, each part telling its own story if you knew how to read it. A memory flashed of teaching new guys how to spot metal fatigue by the way light caught the stress patterns. Some things just can't hide their history. And what significance do these healing stages have? Dave asked. They're inconsistent with Mrs. Mercer's account of a single fall onto gardening equipment. Dr. Howard leaned forward slightly. These injuries occurred months apart, with clear healing intervals between incidents. Moreover, the fracture angles suggest direct, focused impact, rather than the dispersed force pattern we'd expect from an accidental fall. I heard Claire's sharp intake of breath from across the art aisle. Warren had stopped fidgeting with his cufflinks. Doctor, you mentioned pattern in your initial report. Could you elaborate? Yes. Dr. Howard's voice took on that same careful tone from the night he'd shown me the sealed files. In my 40 years of practice, including field trauma work in Vietnam, I've encountered this specific combination of staged injuries and rehearsed narratives before. It's a methodology designed to imitate abuse patterns while building a documented history for legal proceedings. The gallery rustled like dry leaves. Judge Harrison's gavel tapped once, gentle but firm. Your Honor, I said, standing slowly, with the court's permission, I'd like to present additional evidence that correlates with Dr. Howard's testimony. She nodded, and I connected my laptop to the courtroom's display system. The screen flickered to life with Warren's text messages, each one time-stamped and highlighted. My hands were steady as I advanced through the thread, letting each message land. Got the timeline sorted. Old injury dates matched the story. Claire nailed the garden fall detail in practice. Totally believable. Need to frame him before month end. HR policies make it stick faster. The room's air felt thicker with each revelation. Someone in the gallery whispered, Jesus Christ, under their breath. Warren's face had gone the color of old concrete. Objection, Your Honor. Thompson was on his feet. These messages lack proper authentication and context. Your Honor, Dave countered. We have full digital records including metadata. The timestamps align precisely with Dr. Howard's medical observations and Mrs. Mercer's hospital visits. Judge Harrison adjusted her reading glasses. Objection overruled. The evidence appears properly authenticated and directly relevant. I closed the laptop, laying my palms flat against the cool table surface. For the first time in weeks, my heartbeat felt normal, like a machine finally running true after you've cleared all the interference. Claire stared straight ahead, but her fingers kept worrying the hem of her cream dress. Warren had given up entirely on his cufflinks. Their attorney shuffled papers without really looking at them, probably searching for any angle that could soften what the evidence had just carved in stone. Judge Harrison removed her glasses deliberately, setting them aside with a small click against the bench. Her gaze moved between the tables like a level finding true center. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for her ruling. She cleared her throat once, the sound sharp in the weighted silence. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, she began, I am prepared to render my decision. I stood as Judge Harrison's voice filled the courtroom with the kind of clarity I'd been fighting for these past weeks. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds Mrs. Mercer's accusations not only unsubstantiated, but deliberately fabricated with malicious intent. Her words cut through the air like a freshly sharpened blade. The medical records, combined with the electronic communications between Mrs. Mercer and her brother, paint a disturbing picture of calculated deception. You know that moment when a machine finally runs true after you've cleared all the gunk out? That's what it felt like, hearing truth echo off those wooden walls. The court orders immediate financial penalties in the amount of $175,000 to be paid from the joint accounts of Claire and Warren Mitchell. The judge's pen scratched against paper. Furthermore, these findings will be entered into public record, specifically noting the systematic nature of Mrs. Mercer's manipulations and Mr. Mitchell's coordinating role. I watched Claire's face drain of color, that mask of certainty cracking like thin ice. Warren's shoulders slumped forward as if someone had cut his puppet strings. Funny how quick confidence can collapse when truth finally gets its day. Additionally, Judge Harrison continued, copies of these findings will be forwarded to Mr. Mercer's employer, clearing his employment record of all related allegations. The weight that lifted from my chest right then. Ever tried to breathe after a heavy beam's been moved off you? Kind of like that. Outside in the hallway, Dr. Howard gripped my hand with those steady surgeon's fingers of his. Justice isn't always convenient, he said, but it usually finds its way home. I nodded, thinking how his gravelly voice would always remind me of that night in his office, when he'd pushed that folder across his desk and helped turn the tide. Thank you, I said, meaning it down to my bones, for everything. The drive home felt different. Sky was wearing that clean late-afternoon blue that comes after rain, like nature itself had washed away all the murk. My truck's engine hummed steady beneath me, another sound that had stayed true while everything else went sideways. Remember that porch swing I mentioned? The one that had been sitting there half-broken while my world turned upside down? First thing I did was grab my toolbox from the garage. The familiar weight of it in my hand felt right, like shaking hands with an old friend. I laid out my tools on the porch boards. Wrench, oil can, screwdriver. Started with the mounting brackets, making sure each bolt was snug but not stressed. You learn in factory work that over-tightening can be just as dangerous as leaving things loose. That chain on the left had always been Claire's favorite side. I tested it anyway, feeling each link the way I'd check conveyor connections at work. The metal was solid, just needed cleaning. Some things stay strong even when they're neglected. Remember that hinge that used to tick in the wind? The one that had started to sound like a warning I should have heeded? I hit it with 3 drops of oil, working it back and forth until the motion went smooth. Sometimes fixing things means facing exactly what was broken. The seat itself was still good oak. Just needed tightening where the slats met the frame. My hands remembered every groove, every corner. 20 years of sitting here, watching sunsets with a woman I thought I knew. Funny how wood can outlast trust. When I finished, I gave the swing a gentle push. It rocked easy in the evening breeze, chains whispering instead of squealing. No more warnings, no more secrets. Just clean motion and honest engineering. I sat down, feeling the boards hold solid beneath me. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of my neighbor's grilling and fresh-cut grass. Regular smells from regular lives. The kind of normal I'd fought to keep. The swing creaked once, soft and familiar, as I settled my weight. Looking out across the yard where trouble had started with a gardening lie, I felt the truth of what had happened settle into place like a well-fitted gear. Truth always outlives lies, I whispered, and the words felt right in my mouth, like they'd been waiting there all along.